I was born and raised in the Washington, D.C. area, Bethesda, Maryland, to be specific, and I started to play the violin at age 11. And while in junior high school, while I was playing in an orchestra for the British Embassy, which does Gilbert Sullivan production every year, I was playing in the pit orchestra. I met a violin maker who was a local DC maker, and although an amateur maker, he taught people how to make instruments. And I studied with him for 2 summers when I was 15 and 16. And then later on, I went on to a professional school of violin making in Chicago, where I stayed for 4 years. Met my wife up there. Also got involved in backstage theater. So music, violin playing, theater, violin making are all very connected for me. And I'm very, very glad that IRCC has their video club, that video group, that I was able to come and help out and have fun with that too. I still do make instruments. As Barbie said, I've made about 200 instruments. And most of my career, I had a full-service violin shop. We did maybe 700 rentals a year. I did a lot of repairs and restorations, and still made instruments, usually a couple a year, but primarily did the repairs and restorations. Now, I've set up a little corner in my garage, first garage I've ever owned. So I got my man cave and building instruments again. So I made one last year when we were here, and I've got 2 that I'm working on this year, which are out here, and certainly hope you'll come up and look at them when you, after we're done talking, hopefully you can see in the pictures, which are almost all these pictures, by the way, are either of the instrument that I made last year or of processes going on this year. There's a few oldies in there that when I did a slideshow about 25 years ago with like real slides. So they're not as clean and clear as the digital format of today. So let's get started. Violins started in the form that you see them today in the middle 1500s. Andreas Amati was considered really the father of violin, of the modern violin, and it has changed very little since. Only a couple things on it have changed. In the early 1800s, the orchestra pitch changed from a lower tuning to a higher tuning, and that put too much stress on the instrument, so they had to do a few changes on the interior, and exterior. Interior, there's a piece of wood called a bass bar that had to be lengthened and made bigger, and the neck itself had to be made longer. Both of those were because of the added tension that the higher string tunings created. Today we also have more modern strings, more modern materials that they can make strings out of. Back in the 1700s, 1600s, 1500s, they used goat gut to make strings. People refer to it as cat gut, but maybe not use cats. It's goat gut or sheep gut. Those are the materials that were used. Until the Industrial Revolution, we didn't have steel to be able to make the metallic strings. So, and of course, not the processes to be able to make those kinds of strings. As I said, they were changed around 1800. And the only other thing that was added is something called a chin rest, which just makes it a little bit more comfortable to play, and a shoulder rest again for comfort. Both of those things were not part of the original equipment that the violins would have made. Some of the greatest masters you probably have heard, certainly of Antonio Stradivarius. He lived in the late 1600s, early 1700s, died in 1737. His teacher was a descendant of Andreas Amati, and there was also he was also one of the great masters. That's Niccolo Amati and the Guarneri family. So you have 3 prominent families, all from one town in Italy, Cremona. There are certain other great makers, and they've never really gotten to the level of the Stradivarius and Granary and so forth. Part of that is flexibility, part of it is, of course, the sound. The violin is smart, just like a Rembrandt, so even an ugly Rembrandt is still worth a lot of money. A Strad that doesn't sound very good is still worth a lot of money. The most recent Strad sold at auction for $16 million. Okay? It does not have a $16 million sound. Turn it up a little. I will try to not wander too far from my. Sorry about that. As far as sound goes, you know, for a very long time people kept saying, "Oh, what's the Strad sound? Why is the Strad sound so perfect?" And there's all sorts of myths and theories behind that, some of which have been related to the varnish. Well, there's no mystery in the varnish. Basically, you probably walk down the street to the local apothecary, bought the same stuff that the painters put on their canvases to seal them. But what happens is over 300 years, things change. Both the wood changes, the varnish changes, the varnish gets worn away. Very, very little of the original varnishes put on these old instruments are still there. If you look under a microscope with them, you will not see very much varnish. You see the sealer that was used on the wood, and that's about it. And the colors, you know, are still there, both from age and from the original color. The sound when a violin is vibrated, the sound, of course, the string vibrates back and forth. Then that sound hits the bridge that the strings touch, and the sound goes down through the bridge, and then down and across the top of the instrument, and then down through what's on the inside of the little post called sound post. We'll talk about that later. And then it's reflected off the back of the instrument, which is a very, very hard piece of wood. It's maple versus a soft spruce top. So then that sound is projected out of the instrument. The instrument is made asymmetrically on the inside. The bass bar is on one side, the sound post is on the other. When the string vibrates, you've got the string sitting on the bridge, and the string is vibrating, and it makes the bridge do this. The top is doing this because you got a bar under here and a post under here. So it's doing this. It's creating kind of a bellows, and it helps pump sound out of the instrument, so which can create a much louder, stronger, fuller sound than you get from instruments like guitars, which do not have sound holes that are flat and not arched. So the violin can have a lot more tension and get this projection. Now we move on to the actual construction. The parts of the instrument. Some of these parts will make sense to you. You'll recognize some of them. Of course, the scroll is up at the top, a conical kind of a shape. You've got the pegs. Here, the peg box, which is this whole area. The nut, which is a small piece of wood that the strings vibrate, cross over before they run down the length of the instrument. That's kind of where the strings stop, so that you have an actual start and an end. So you've got your start, and then the bridge down here, which is the end, and that's the vibrating length of your string. Then you have the neck, which is the area that the instrument is held and was played, although there are notes up here that are played too. Your strings, then the body of the instrument is divided into three sections. You've got the upper, center, and lower valves. You've got your sound holes, or F holes, right here. Your fine tuners, which are just a modern convenience for the kinds of strings that we use today, which have metal cores or metal outside. So they're the fine adjustments instead of using the pegs, which are rough adjustments. And then you have the tailpiece, and then this modern chin rest here that's something to use to help hold the instrument. When we make the instrument, we have lots of different pieces that we have to make it out of. And the inside structure is made from either spruce or willow or basswood. Those are all lightweight but strong wood. And that's for the blocks and lines. And then we also use spruce for the bass bar, which is also in class. The next ribs and back are made out of maple, the top out of spruce, the pegs, fingerboard, tailpiece, chin rest are all out of a hardwood and usually a fairly pretty wood, rosewood, ebony, or boxwood. Ebony is probably the most used wood. It's black. The fingerboard is also made out of that same wood. It's very, very, very dense and hard. It doesn't wear. It takes a long time for it to wear, which is one reason why we do it. And then, of course, you got the strings, the bridge, and the sound post, which, as I said, inside the instrument, which many people refer to as the soul of the instrument. It's not glued in. It can be adjusted from the outside to change the tonal characters of the instrument. These are some of the materials. This is the block that's used for the neck. This is the back and the sides of the instrument. All three of those are the maple. And this is the top. This right here is the wood that you're going to see in one of these instruments over here. So these were in this shape in September when I got here. Now they're like this down here. These are the tools that were used 150, 250, 350 years ago. I still use almost all of these same tools. Very, very few of the tools that are used are modern, as in electrical. There are a few things that I have. I have a bandsaw, I have a drill press. They're used for some of the grunt work, non-artistic work, and you'll see a few of those methods that I'm using. But most of these tools, and I've brought a few of them here, they're either identical or they are just modern versions of them, or, as I said, identical. When we select the wood for the back especially, we need to first decide what we want it to look like. Depending on how you cut it from the tree, you either have a slab cut or a quarter sawn piece of wood. Top wood is always split so that when you're carving it, you know exactly the direction the wood is going to cut. So what that means is you take the log, you take a sharp blade, you pound it, and it splits the wood apart so that the wood is splitting along with the grain, and so that you know exactly how you're going to be cutting it. Because of the complex curves of the instrument, you need to know exactly where it's going to be cutting, in which direction that grain is going to cut. The back is, the maple is not as important, but still somewhat. As I said, the ribs, the back and the neck need to match. The ribs and the back usually come out of the same piece of wood. The neck just something similar. But it's a visual thing. They don't have to match, but it's best if they do. The wood needs to be dried. It needs to be air dried, not kiln dried, which means it can't be put in an oven to dry the sap out. Because what happens is it forces that sap to dry into the wood, clogging the pores and keeping the molecules sound from vibrating. I won't use wood that's less than 10 years air dried. Some makers will use wood as little as 3, and that's about as much as you can do. The wood is also picked for its tonal clarity, and I'll give you a little bit of an example here. This is just a plain piece of pine from the hardware store. Pine and spruce are basically very, very similar. Pine grows very fast, spruce usually very slow. When we pick wood, we want wood that has been growing very slow. It has a winter and a summer growth. The winter is the dark lines in wood grain. The summer is the lighter, the space between the lines. You want the growth to be fairly similar. So generally, you have a high altitude growing area. So for the most part, wood that's on the East Coast, like maple from the East Coast, isn't good. Most wood that we use is either European or from Alaska or Washington State, that area. Anyway, this is a plain piece of pine. It kind of has a thud. This is a piece of violin wood, and you'll be able to hear the difference. That's what we call tone wood. It actually has a pitch you can identify, and later on we'll talk a little bit about that. This is what I was talking about, the quarter or slab cut. If you look at this one over here, the piece of wood that we use for the instrument is cut coming from the outside of the tree towards the center. So Here's that triangle, like this. This is the way the tree grows. Here is your circle of your tree going up like that. A slab cut piece means that we cut across, but not through the center. So if we're going to make an instrument that has only a one piece, may only have a one piece rather than two put together like this would need to come from a, if you're going to do this kind of a cut, it would have to come from a much bigger tree than cutting all the way across. This also becomes, because of that grain, becomes a weaker wood, and we have to make the instrument slightly different because of it. It changes more with the humidity. Just in general, it's a little harder to deal with. This is how those two different pieces of wood look once they're put together into an instrument. This is your quarter cut. The grain, you may not be able to see it too well, but the grain is actually this way, and this is what we call figure or flame. Some people call it tiger maple or fiddleback. It's not only used for fiddle. This is the slab cut, and you can see it's kind of got this topographical thing going on here. All right, so you got a little small circle here, and they get bigger and bigger and bigger. You still have your figure, but it's broken up. It's not all the way across, and that all has to do with the slicing across. Okay, so we start with that piece of wood that I showed you earlier. We've cut it out of our tree, and then we take that and we need to divide it in two.